O nosso primeiro orador de hoje é líder em tendências de tecnologia e como elas afetam os negócios e a nossa sociedade. Ele trabalhou em Nova Iorque durante uma década, antes de se tornar editor executivo da Wired, em Londres, que eu sou muito fã. Autor de 5 livros, é cofundador da plataforma digital de histórias My London Story. O seu maior interesse é perceber como a tecnologia, os negócios, a ciência e as ideias moldam o mundo. Passou as últimas 2 décadas a desenvolver trabalhos premiados para empresas e marcas de média. Façam barulho, ele vem aí. Greg Williams, senhoras e senhores. Greg! Hello, Greg. Very nice to meet you. Awesome to meet you.
Bom dia a todos. My wife's family actually lives here in Portugal, so I'm always happy to be here. Thank you for that kind introduction. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about sort of some of the trends that we see at Wired. If you're not fully aware of what we do at Wired, Wired is a magazine and a publication. We operate on many platforms, events and consulting, as well as having a print publication and an online publication that's looking at the future, that's thinking about how the world is changing and really considering how the world is being shaped over the coming years. So we're really thinking about the trends, the ideas, the businesses, the technologies that are going to be shaping the world in the coming days and the coming years. And I'm very fortunate in that I get to spend my days talking to people who are really thinking about what's coming next. So the entrepreneurs, the investors, the governmental agencies, the designers, the people who are really shaping what we're going to be seeing in the coming years. So I'm here to talk a little bit about what's coming over the horizon in terms of the significant trends that are changing consumer behavior, that are changing business. And I'm really going to sort of, I think, dig into sort of some of the kind of like the technologies. But one of the key sort of like real kind of idea that I want to kind of impress upon you at the very beginning is that none of these technologies is happening in a silo, right? They're all interconnected. So we now live in this highly interdisciplinary world where machine learning, the blockchain, computational biology, additive manufacturing and other accelerating technologies are all bumping together, right? They're all coming together in various applications and they're all influencing each other. That's the important point. So whether you're in retail or shipping or transportation or pharmaceuticals or consultancy or government, finance or healthcare, all these technologies are a threat, but they're also an enormous opportunity. And how we fare in this rapidly evolving ecosystem is not actually going to be down to the technology. It's going to be about our human qualities, how we adapt, how we embrace change, and ultimately how we challenge our assumptions about business as usual. There are some kind of strong geopolitical trends that we're seeing at the moment, clearly. The fragmentation of the internet, the news that constantly seems to be on at the moment about the trade war between the US and China, the rise of nationalism in some parts of the world, and of course climate change, the biggest challenge that we face of all. But let me sort of start here. So it's a quote from Mark Andreessen, software is eating the world. He's absolutely right. The world is taking on this digital layer. No industry, no business is immune. So we now have internet-connected monitors for smart metering, automation in a vast array of industries from healthcare to teleco, black box trading in the finance industry, machine-to-machine systems that communicate over the internet without the mediation of human beings. And what that means is that every business, every industry clearly is in a period of transformation because this is something that's not kind of happening in the future. It's happening now. It's happening today. It's happening to all our businesses. And we really have to think about the enormous opportunities that there are in these new technologies, these new trends, these new ideas that we can see. The challenge, many organizations still today have a very particular mindset. They think of themselves, oh, we're an automotive company. We're a healthcare company. We're a bank. We're an insurance company. Actually, today, they're all technology companies. If you think about Ford or BMW or Toyota in the era of Tesla or the Chinese giant BYD, think about what HSBC or Lloyd's or Barclays or Bank of America is in the era of Monzo or Number 26 or Revolut. So today it doesn't really matter whether you consider yourself a tech company. You are a tech company, whatever vertical you're operating in, whether that's to optimize your performance, whether that is to automate business process, or to reach new customers, or to deliver new products and services. There's no going back, no pretending this isn't happening, because new businesses, particularly ones founded in the past few years, are already looking at customers who are far more digitally savvy. So are there any cyborgs in the room? Are there any people who think of themselves as a cyborg? Well, of course, we all are today. Everyone in this room is an augmented human being of some kind because we're living in the mobile era. We are constantly connected to a repository of pretty much all the knowledge that's ever been written down. We all have access to the most powerful computing stack pretty much ever created. So we're in this mobile internet era now, but now looking forward, the only constant, the only consistent thing we can definitely see is change. And it's going to be relentless. And it's going to be led by data-centric technologies that allow us to understand the world and allow us to understand other human beings in new and interesting ways. And much of this is driven by design in computing. I'm going to talk a little bit later about voice and vision as the new interfaces. But I think one thing to consider today is we are designing technologies to adapt to the way that we behave as human beings, right? Some of you, you're all very young, clearly, in this audience, but some of you might remember what it was like to interact with computing in the early days, where you had to write a command line. Today, when you buy a new product, there's a good chance that it probably won't even have an instruction manual, right? It'll be intuitive. So this is a huge shift away, right? We're designing technologies so they adapt to us as human beings. Huge shift away, and enables us to move much more quickly than we used to. And it also, I think, indicates this shift to automation that we're seeing across every industry. So this is a nice quote I like from Chris Anderson, who was the editor of Wired in the US. That first 10 years, the first decade about finding new social and innovation models online, the 10 years after that, we've run out of that 10 years. But that's the period that we're in right now. The relationship between bits and atoms is getting a lot more complicated. It's moving very, very quickly, but it isn't going to slow down, right? Things are only going to get faster. In the coming years, we're going to attach sensors to pretty much every object in our built environments. We're going to be generating huge amounts of data. It's going to be very hard for us to parse as human beings. We will automate a lot. We'll be applying technologies like artificial intelligence to that data, and they will aid us with our decision making. So clearly, we have to start thinking about what kind of values, what kind of ethics, what kind of systems are we going to put in place to ensure that there are human values and that there is equality and responsibility in all of those pieces of software. So we're living in an era now where the distinction between the physical and the virtual is actually becoming less and less important. Impactful shifts are happening in areas such as industrial digitization, smart cities, mobility, autonomous systems. And what's exciting about that is that coming together of all these different technologies, as I mentioned earlier, offers us all these opportunities. So I think it's worth just touching on where we are in history. So this kind of chart is an indicator of kind of the new period that we're entering. So first industrial revolution, emergence of mechanization, replaced agriculture with industry as the foundations of economic structures of society, right? First industrialization very much driven by using coal as a new energy source. We moved from burning wood to burning coal. Steam engine was the foundation, obviously, for all these innovations. Second industrial revolution also driven by sources of new energy, right? End of the 19th century, new technological breakthroughs were enabled by the emergence of gas and oil. The combustion engine was more efficient. Steel industry grew. Chemical synthesis brought us fertilizer. We became much more efficient. We had new means of communication, which revolutionized our lives, the telegraph and the telephone. Third industrial revolution. This is the area pretty much everyone in this room has been living in, right? The era of the transistor, the era of the microprocessor, and the era of the internet. It's also the period in which biotech made enormous advances. We're now kind of moving into, we have moved into a new phase. So according to the World Economic Forum, which coined the phrase, the fourth industrial revolution, we're moving into an era of cyber-physical systems. That is the merging of the capabilities of both human and machine, this blurring of the virtual and the physical, right? So this is the era of AI, of genomics, of biotech and biometrics, renewable energy, right? That's the new source that we're going to be seeing replacing. You look at countries like Germany now, most of its electricity, I think 70% of its electricity now is produced by renewables. In the UK, we're at 50%, but that's increasing. And that means that obviously costs will drop because renewables by definition are renewable. This is combined obviously with the shift away from carbon-based forms of energy. We're seeing a lot of investment companies now looking at their portfolios and thinking about their exposure to companies that have some kind of fossil fuel involvement. So these factors are really coming into play. This is a graph I think that really offers incumbents a sense of how hard it is to stay ahead, right? So this is the S&P 500 over a significant period of time, and you can see how much harder it is now for companies to stay ahead. 55 years in 1960 was the average company lifespan. We're down to much less than that today. And it's very, very, very hard now for large organizations to be adaptive because of the challenges that we're seeing in the marketplace. If you look at a list of the world's most valuable companies for 20 years ago, back in the year 2000, they would be very, very similar to the companies that were the most valuable companies a decade before that. It would be the obvious companies: General Motors, ExxonMobil, GE, Bank of America, AT&T. These companies of the industrial age. You look at the list today, what do you see? You see companies like Microsoft and other big tech companies dominating those positions, and obviously the big Chinese companies being in place as well. What does that mean? That means that within our lifetime, there has been this transition from the companies of the industrial age to the companies of the information age. Right? That is an enormous shift that we should not underestimate. If we look forward to another 10 or 20 years, I would place a very strong bet that we'll see the most valuable company in the world will probably be a renewable energy company, a healthcare company that manages to make a significant breakthrough, and we're probably looking at space companies as well. So we're going through this period of change. Why has this come about? Well, let's return to the Ark Andreessen quote, right? Software means that the entry barriers for startups are much lower. You can outsource back office, you can get flexible office space, you can use open source software, you can use the cloud to scale up or down, and increasingly we're seeing AI as a service. All the big tech players are now offering artificial intelligence as a service, so you can buy it. You can try it on a small project, see if it works, see what kind of results you get, and then you can roll it out once you have a proof of concept. How does that play out? Well, the biggest challenge for any startup is achieving scale, and the biggest challenge for every incumbent is adding innovation. You look at a company like Netflix, it's really tough for a company like, for a major broadcaster to add the innovation that Netflix added, but they're increasingly catching up. So this is battle now where Netflix is trying to get to 200 million subscribers before the incumbents can back up. What every technology, of course, needs is a use case, right? There's no point in building technology just for technology's sake. You have to be able to deploy it. This is a really good example on the screen of a use case not going well. So this is an executive from a very large hardware company at CES, a big trade show, a couple of years ago, and he wanted to show off the company's new virtual assistant. You can see the virtual assistant there on the left side of the screen. And the way that they were going to show this virtual assistant off is they stocked a refrigerator full of delicious food, and they asked the virtual assistant, "What shall we make for dinner?" And the virtual assistant replied, "You should make a cheese and tomato sandwich." Now, I don't know about you, but I really don't need artificial intelligence and robotics in my life if it's telling me to make a sandwich. I could have made that decision myself without any AI whatsoever. So the lesson from this is it's very, very rare that there is a category killer product like a smartphone, an iPhone, or an Android device. Those were category killer products. They wiped out everything else in the marketplace. We're not there with the connected fridge yet. We're not there yet with the connected home, but that's the direction of travel. And so I think that it's worth considering the famous Bill Gates quote, which is like we overestimate the impact of technology in the short term, and we underestimate it in the long term. So I'm going to now sort of like look at some of the key technologies that we're seeing and really kind of like get into them in terms of like how we think that in the long term they will change things and the impact that they'll have. So obviously robotics, autonomous robots that we have today can do repetitive tasks. Increasingly, there will be robots that we can deploy in new ways, like this one from Boston Dynamics. Obviously, the only trouble that we're going to have in the future is that future generations of robots will be able to go use AI to go on YouTube and see how we treated their ancestors, which might not work out too well for us. So we're increasingly seeing the movement of these kinds of robots from industrial uses to the service industry. We're seeing them in healthcare. They're being deployed in Japan in interesting ways because Japan has a demographic challenge. They have too many elderly people, not a lot of young people, so they need young people in order to help turn people over in bed and do those kinds of tasks. I'm sure some of you have been to factories and see robots at work. They have to have very large kill zones around them, cages around them to prevent human beings from being hurt. The future, we're going to have to try and think how robots can actually interact with human beings in safe ways, how they can be deployed in meaningful ways. So this is a bit of a gimmick from Boston Dynamics, but what's interesting about this is you can now lease this robot for around the same as you can lease a car, right? And what's interesting is that we're starting to see real use cases in the real world where people are using robotics in this way. Where are we? Okay, so one interesting piece of research that came out of automation. So people are talking about robots wiping out jobs, automation wiping out jobs. We had the McKinsey report last year, I think 2 years ago, estimated 375 million workers, 14% of the global workforce would find themselves, their roles in the workforce affected, right? Enormous occupational switches going on by 2030. This is comparable to the switch from agriculture to industrial use cases in the 20th century. There's a cited paper from Carl Frey and Michael Osborne, University of Oxford, estimated that 47% of all jobs in the US are at risk from automation. But research also indicates that the impact on business can be incredibly positive, right? In July last year, these German and Danish academics offered this opportunity that if you invested in robotics over the long term, your productivity increased. However, the good news, before everyone starts getting worried about their jobs, pretty much every major study that's been done on the jobs of the future suggests that automation and robotics will be a net deliverer of jobs. The World Economic Forum thinks that by the mid-period of this decade, there will be around 133 million new jobs created. Corporate governance is going to be crucial in this transition, ensuring that we focus on individuals, right? So we offer people in our organizations lifelong learning rather than just upskilling workers into roles that will soon face automation. And don't just think, oh, this is going to affect people who are working in retail and it's going to affect taxi drivers. It's going to affect the white-collar sector quite significantly as well. Goldman Sachs used to have 500 people on its equities trading desk. It now has 3 people. So this is going to impact all kinds of roles. Talking of this automation, obviously this means 2 technologies coming together largely. This is robotics and AI. This is an interesting example from OpenAI, which is a not-for-profit from Northern California. What's interesting about this is that what we're seeing a robot that has learned, right? It's actually a piece of software that's learned. This is just off-the-shelf robotics they're using, but the AI has learned to turn the cube up and it will be rewarded because it's won a game once it turns the cube the right way up. What's interesting about this is that this then allows us to give machines tasks to solve problems in their own worlds, and it also suggests that in some way In the future, we'll have machines able to operate within virtual worlds, teach them things at a pace much more quick than the timescales that we can. So this is going to obviously enable innovation. But I think this is much more the kind of use case that we're going to see these robots in the future. So this is a UK startup called Starship. There are other startups. There's one in China called JD.com is using certain kinds of robots. These are delivery robots. These are actually functional in the UK and other places. They make food deliveries, and you can see this having a use case, right? You can see these things moving around our cities. They could become part of a customer journey. Clearly, it's much easier to deploy this in a new town in, Arizona than it is in Lisbon or in London, which are ancient cities which are far more complex and have much more going on. So the crucial challenge here is how do we enable machines to interact with human beings in complex environments? How do we deploy this kind of technology? One kind of, I think good example of this is to just step back to the 19th century. So this is a guy called Elisha Otis. Here he is in Crystal Palace at the World's Fair demonstrating his invention. The invention was the elevator. And what he was trying to show people was that even if the rope snapped, the machine would stop. No one would be killed. People were terrified to get in elevators in the 19th century. And he wanted his invention obviously to be widely adopted. Here's another invention. This is the first ever ATM. This is in London in 1967, and people gathered around to see this invention. They were so excited by it. I think that, what's interesting to me is that, you think about the impacts that these inventions have, right? People didn't used to want to get inside of elevators, but once that fear was overcome, we were able to see the building of cities because we were able to go upwards. So cities like Chicago and New York City would not have existed. This is a Walmart store from last year. What was interesting about this is that they're trialing robots in store, and when they first applied these robots, there were in 50 stores in the southern states of the United States. People were taking selfies with them, they were filming them, they were putting the videos on YouTube. Researchers went back 18 months later. 18 months later, the human beings were ignoring the robots. The robots were just going about their jobs. They were scanning codes. So we are really at this kind of the edge of this autonomy economy where we are going to stop noticing the technology around us and it's going to be able to be much more seamless within our environment. And that's why we need to have controls over it and ethical standards. I'm running out of time a little bit, so I'm going to whiz through the next few slides. Drones, really important. We're now able to sort of solve some really interesting geo-economic trends through drones. Just think of them as a surfer in the sky, not so much a flying object. In this instance, it's disaster relief, but they obviously have uses in sort of town planning and agriculture. And we can see all kinds of trends, including global trends such as deforestation in forests across the world. We also can see them having impact in how we understand customers, the influence of location on sales, traffic patterns, supply chain disruption. But I think the last one's the most important one. There are companies now that's selling the data that they're getting from their drones and their satellites to the financial services industry, who are making big bets on the performance of big retailers. So they're able then to look, but simply through photographs from parking lots, right? So they're able to look down, see how busy a parking lot is. They're also able to look at data like the number of people in a group, how many passengers, their ages, what time they arrive. There's an Israeli startup called Windward that can anticipate the movement of commodities around the world just by looking at satellite images of ships and the displacement of water. Then they're able to make a good bet on the movement of commodities. Geo-economic trends. We're going to see the rise of, this is a startup called Lilium based in Munich, Germany. This is a really interesting opportunity to really think about how we travel around and how we are able to apply technologies like this in our built environments, given the fact that we are going to, I think pretty much 80% of the world's population will be living in megacities within the next, by the end of the century. Obviously, every pretty much incumbent like Daimler, aircraft manufacturers like Airbus are getting into the game, as well as companies like Lilium and another company in Germany called Volocopter. Right, so autonomous vehicles. I'm going to just whiz through here because I'm pretty much out of time. I'll just make this final point about autonomous vehicles. What we're seeing now is a move from the hardware manufacturers, BMW, Ford and the likes, to wanting to be software players. So we're seeing a really interesting move from them being just these providers of these objects that you drive away to service providers whereby they will want a relationship with you moving forward. They will also offer mobility as a service, right? So you don't actually buy the car any longer, you buy access to a service, and you buy, you'll drive it one day, you'll get an autonomous vehicle the next, maybe the day after that, you'll get a Mini, a BMW 7 Series, it doesn't matter. They're providing mobility services across a wide range of products, and then also trying to sell you other forms of services, such as in a autonomous vehicle, you could maybe have a doctor's appointment, or you could watch up your Netflix show that you're watching. One final thing we're seeing is the shift away from touchscreens to vision and voice as the ways that we interact with technology. This is the Microsoft product HoloLens. It's a very old video, but I think it demonstrates really well the application. This is used in a medical situation. This is a guy called Shafi Ahmed, who's a surgeon in London, and he broadcasts his operations on social media. That's on Snapchat. This is him having a conference with people in Mumbai and also Atlanta, so they're able to give a patient the best possible treatment. So technologies like VR, technologies like AR mean that we're going to increasingly move away from touch as a new interface. I'd just like to take a little bit of inspiration as a final note from a guy called Massimo Banzi. Massimo is one of the principles behind the Arduino. The Arduino is an open source microcomputer, and he has a saying which I really, really like, which is you don't need anyone's permission to make something great. So thanks very much.